begin with the next session, which is on conformity assessment. This will include why is conformity assessment important under the TBT agreement and what are the key principles, including a discussion around the ongoing development of the guidelines in this area. The resource persons for this session are again our wonderful knowledgeable hosts from the WTO, Mr. Erik Wijkstrom and Mr. Mateo Ferrero. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so there is a fantastic session on conformity assessment with a guest that will join us online from the United States at 4:30, and then we will have a wide variety of local speakers speaking about conformity assessment, which basically means that I have around 30 minutes to quickly walk you through perhaps a few key principles with respect to conformity assessment, and then maybe also cover a little bit the current work of the committee in developing guidelines in this area. And here, of course, Anwar and Erik may wish to come in as appropriate, and maybe we can also continue the discussion tomorrow morning as well. But the idea would be to at least pave the way to the other set of presentations that will begin at 4:30. So, by way of introduction, let's take a look at this statement from our former Director General, Roberto Azevedo, who in 2019 was indicating that to compete in foreign markets and diversify into new ones, countries need institutions to test, measure, and demonstrate the safety and quality of products. Basically, he was underscoring how, for international trade to take place, one of the most important pillars you need is trust. And in order to develop that trust between the buyer and the seller, and between authorities in the exporting country and authorities in the importing country, conformity assessment plays a central role. And conformity assessment should also be understood as one of the key components within this broader ecosystem of national quality infrastructure, which includes, of course, also standardization, accreditation, etc., etc. So conformity assessment is a key point there. So let's start with some facts, just so that you see a little bit the magnitude of the issue. This is the World Trade Report from 2016. Just a report developed by the International Trade Center in Geneva from 2016, in which it was found, roughly speaking, that 60 to 80% of global trade is subject to technical regulations in most regions of the world. Remember yesterday how Erik was showing this graph that was showing decreasing tariffs over the last decades, and then increasing non-tariff measures. And within non-tariff measures, of course, technical regulations are the most common type of instrument. So this is just to give an indication about the extent to which regulation plays a role in global trade these days. So if you have 60 to 80% of global trade subject to technical regulations, that also means that you will need to have the corresponding conformity assessment. So this already gives us a very good indication of the extent to which conformity assessment is prevalent in terms of allowing global trade these days. This is the report, the World Trade Report from 2016, the WTO flagship publication, that found, and this is particularly important when we have this type of discussions in developing countries, that TBT measures affect particularly acutely developing countries and micro, small and medium enterprises in developing countries, because they often entail costs which tend to be fixed, And for some of these countries and some of these companies, these costs can become potentially a barrier because perhaps they are prohibited, and therefore then companies simply decide not to engage in international trade and seek export markets. And this is a problem because in most of the developing world, MSMEs are really the backbone of the economy. They are really where most of employment comes from, and also they are particularly relevant with respect to employment for women and also women entrepreneurs. So this is an important sort of statistic or notion because it really shows how this is a problem that we need to address, because we need to ensure that we have a level playing field in this regard. So maybe just two more graphs, simply just to by way of introduction. So this was a survey also conducted by the International Trade Center in Geneva, and in the survey, the idea was to know which of the non-tariff measures create most trouble for exports in the agri-food business and in the manufacturing sector. And as you can see here on the chart, it is clear that TBT measures are the lion's share when it comes to assessing its burdensomeness. So technical regulations, that's what you see in the light blue, they represent a significant issue, but conformity assessment, which is the darker blue, is an even higher concern in agri-food and manufacturing sectors. In some cases, it's almost for 50% of respondents, that's the main concern in terms when it comes to international trade. And if we zero in within conformity assessment, what we see is that the biggest concerns in these two sectors are testing and product certification. So within the universe of conformity assessment, this survey reveals that in the agri-food and in the manufacturing sectors, these are the two most burdensome types of measures: testing and product certification. So the idea was simply just to give you a bit of a flavor, show you why conformity assessment, while it may be a little confusing, potentially even a little dry, for exporters on the ground, this is where most of the hurdles actually affect them. So for people who are trying to assist exporters, who are trying to also develop these type of measures, this is something to keep in mind. Now let's take a look at the rules. So remember, we had our famous 5 principles yesterday. So the beauty is that those 5 principles apply equally in the area of conformity assessment. So here, simply to go very quickly, we also have this policy space to pursue legitimate objectives. This is, of course, one of the central underpinnings of the TBT agreement. But in addition to that, we have these central obligations calling for non-discrimination, also requiring members not to adopt conformity assessment that is more burdensome than necessary. We also have this harmonization obligation in order to harmonize with international guides and recommendations and therefore facilitate trade. And then, of course, finally, we have the whole range of transparency disciplines that we will cover in more detail tomorrow, also applying to conformity assessment. But I think there is something additional, and that's why I will stop for a minute on these additional provisions. This is what you find in Article 5.2. and I think it's worth devoting a minute or two just to quickly go through these disciplines, because they are really very detailed and they really go way further compared to the rules we have on technical regulations. And I think this already gives you an indication that even in '95, when the TBT agreement entered into force, negotiators already knew that conformity assessment can really become a hurdle. So they saw the need to go a bit deeper into, let's say, the powers of the state to guide how governments need to conduct this type of measure. So Article 5.2, which is a long article, provides mandatory guidance with respect to how to conduct conformity assessment. And let's quickly go through each of these issues. So according to Article 5.2, there is a requirement to undertake conformity assessment as expeditiously as possible. In other words, members are mandated to only take the time necessary to assess conformity. You cannot, drag your feet for years and then pretend you are too busy. No, if you are meant to assess conformity, it needs to be done as expeditiously as possible. Second bullet point, you also need to provide transparency with respect to the time that it will take. So you need to publish in advance how much time it would take to assess conformity with a specific regulation. You also need to inform the applicant in a precise and complete manner of any deficiencies at the outset of the process, so that if there is a deficiency, if you have one paper that is not there, something is wrong, the applicant can quickly correct it, and therefore the process can continue. And of course, you also need to provide information at all stages so that the applicant is aware of where the process is going. Information requirements cannot be about anything. They are limited to the information that is necessary to determine conformity. So as you can see, this is pretty detailed guidance, but I think it's worth taking the moment to go through, because you see how it can really assist conformity assessment bodies to do their job properly and to make sure that that type of central activity does not become a trade barrier. Something super important, especially for the private sector. The confidentiality of any information provided as part of conformity assessment needs to be guaranteed. With respect to fees, of course, sometimes conformity assessment bodies will charge a fee for assessing conformity. Well, there is also specific guidance indicating how and in which ways those fees need to be equitable. In other words, you cannot charge your local producers 10 and then for imported products 200 without any justification. Maybe there is no need to have the very same figure for both, because if you have to travel and you have to go and visit a foreign factory to assess conformity, yeah, maybe that will cost more, but the fees need to be equitable. The siting of facilities should not cause any unnecessary inconvenience, in the sense that the visits should really limit themselves to looking at the issues that are related to the product in question, to the process in question, and not to other parts. And then I'll just quickly go to the last bullet, simply to indicate that given that this can become such a hurdle, Article 5.2 of the TBT Agreement also establishes that in the legislation there should be a clear procedure to review complaints and to take corrective action. Because of course it's normal that maybe at some point there is a mistake made, or the company that is doing, the applicant takes issue with some part of the decision. well, there should be a way, a formal way, to raise a complaint, and in case there is a mistake, corrective action needs to be taken. Absolutely.
That's it. Can you please elaborate on confidence of conformity? That the cap to change product requirement limited to what is necessary to provide adequate confidence of conformity. Are we talking about MLAs?
That's a great question. Maybe the way I understand that is, conformity assessment for authorities, the benchmark, let's say, when you know your goal as an authority, as a conformity assessment body, is to have confidence that a given product complies, let's say, with a technical regulation. So it's ultimately a slightly subjective point of view. It's about whether the authority itself has enough confidence to be satisfied that a given product complies with technical requirements. So in a sense, what that is trying to do is to indicate that if you have already confidence that a product complies, then you need to stop, and I think that the duty is fulfilled. But I'm not sure if I fully got your question.
If we are talking about conformity, then the agreement and the kind of deliberations which has made across the globe is something which create the confidence. So, because I am working with a national accreditation body here in India, so when we talk about conformity assessment, we have a broad structure which covers different reasons. Like when we talk about Asian reason, it is APEC. When we are talking, as I was discussing with Anwarji also, so we have a specific reasons which is defined for particular conformity assessment body, which we call CAP. And for this confidence, they have a multilateral and mutual recognition arrangement. So that actually built a kind of confidence, if I am correct, is the same thing is mentioned in the line.
Okay, now I see. Maybe, Erik, feel free to jump in here. But I think maybe what you're raising, which is super interesting, is maybe the role of mutual recognition agreements as a tool for authorities to have confidence in each other's results. And there is actually a provision on that, which I think is Article 6, that of course encourages these types of mutual recognition agreements, because they are actually a very effective tool to facilitate trade and to maybe reduce how some of these assessments can become burdensome for exporters. So yes, thank you for raising that point. Any other questions at this stage? Okay, so maybe we go to this third and final part of the presentation, which is, okay, we have some detailed guidance, we have those 5 principles, non-discrimination, necessity, harmonization, but how to determine which conformity assessment procedure I should choose as an authority in a given situation. That's where the agreement does not go all the way through. And therefore, over the years, in the committee and elsewhere, many members, many authorities have had that question. How do we do this? How do we know if I am striking the right balance when it comes to choosing the right type of conformity assessment procedure? What factors should I consider? And because of basically those concerns, those doubts, the TBT committee is now working on developing guidelines precisely to provide more guidance on how to adopt appropriate and proportionate conformity assessment procedures. So this is exactly what Erik was mentioning yesterday in the session before the coffee break. That was the second function of the committee. The first one was the STCs. The second one was developing guidance. So precisely as part of that second function, Anwar, as chair of the committee, has been guiding these discussions for over a year, and we have made great progress in maybe developing these guidelines. So I guess in the next 10 minutes we can maybe go through some of the issues that are being discussed. And of course, if Anwar or Erik would like to jump in, by all means. So simply to indicate where this is coming from, so pursuant to the TBT agreement, every 3 years, the TBT committee undertakes what is called a triennial review, which is an exercise in which the committee does some introspection and looks at its own practices, at its own work, and tries to set the course for the next 3 years. So the current review is the 9th one, so there have been 9. And in the 8th and 9th reviews, the committee has agreed by consensus to develop these non-prescriptive practical guidelines that are aimed at supporting regulators in the choice and design of conformity assessment procedures. So that's where the mandate is coming from, and this process is now well advanced, but maybe let me tell you maybe perhaps a few key milestones in the process. So during the second half of 2021, WTO members sent proposals to the Secretariat that aimed at constructing those guidelines. So each member was indicating, okay, we think that the guidelines need to have A, B, C, and D. And there were over 15 proposals from members that were received during that second semester of 2021. On the basis of all those proposals, the WTO Secretariat prepared what we called an elements paper, something to maybe start the discussion. And this was circulated to all WTO members at the beginning of 2022. And there on the screen you can see the number of the document, Job TBT 438. And WTO members agreed that elements paper was a very good basis for the discussion. So then what we have been doing since has been keeping an interactive and very constructive process in which members that are interested on these issues are making subsequent proposals to improve those elements, to maybe remove a few things that they disagree with, to tweak them a bit, to add more information, to consult with maybe international bodies in this area, like CASCO from ISO. So during 2022, this has been basically a process that has been led by Anwar, mostly through these informal meetings that we were describing before the break, in which a subset of the members, the ones that are most interested on these issues, are gathering, are rolling up their sleeves, and are having very frank discussions about these matters. So I don't know if you would like to come in at this point, Anwar, or yeah, perfect. So
not much, but just to sensitize the issue of what this document is all about. As you know, and Erik did show one very good slide where he showed most of what was that, 43% or what on conformity assessment, the STCs. There was one particular slide, let me see, just go back.
yeah, like 40%.
40%, yeah. So that being the case, interestingly, in the lunch and the coffee break, some of our colleagues here were asking me about CAP. There are 2 points that I touched today, and we'll have a longer discussion tomorrow on the elements of the CAP. You have standards, you have regulations, but the way you do assessment, there is, for lack of any other word, I'm saying there's no standard way that we do it. Different members adopt different ways of doing it. Perhaps there is a first party, second party and third party assessment. That is one way of doing it. But the method that they adopt and the processes that they involve will vary. And that is one of the reasons why you see what the numbers that you see. Like I also said, the committee also renegotiates or works informally and makes a formal document, various guidelines, recommendations, processes. So as a part of the triennial review, building guidelines which are, what is the paraphrasing you use, neutral, flexible, voluntary, what is the language? Non-prescriptive guidelines are being prepared, which will help members to design their conformity assessments. In a way, you are being herded or you are being ushered into a uniformity of how caps should be. And this paper looks very innocuous at this moment, and major countries are involved big time in this document. The negotiations are happening on the sidelines. I hold informal consultations separately from the TBT committee, and I've had, I don't even remember how many I had in the last 1 year, maybe more than 4, a number of email exchanges, and bilaterally a lot. And over time, this conformity assessment guidelines will take more concrete shape. So it's in our interest, if any of you who are raising those issues to me, if you think those issues are not addressed in those guidelines, or it is something that is going against the interest, you should be doing a very thorough research on this paper. The document is 438. Document is 438. At the end of this meeting, we will try and circulate this to everybody who are on the mailing list. Also with the comments which each of those countries have given on various paragraphs. So please, this is the right opportunity for you to make an intervention and have what you want to reflect. I hope a lot of it is taken care, but should you have anything, this is the right time. Like I was talking to somebody when I said, draft stage is the time where you can influence a change in how the text flows. If you let it go, then you lose the opportunity. Please make use of this, and little more detail, what are the elements we can perhaps talk tomorrow when we have some more time. Because I think we are pushing to 4:30, we have some other session, I don't really know. What time is it? So you still have some more time, Mateo.
I think, I just, so we have 1 minute, just to wrap it up, just so that maybe then we start connecting with our presenter online. So maybe I'll just open the floor. Are there any questions or comments? We can of course come back to these tomorrow, but just to see if there is any present matter. Yes.
We talked about these guidelines being developed by the TBT committee. I just want to understand what is the legal status of these guidelines, because we have the text of the TBT agreement, and what is the obligations of the members toward these guidelines developed by different committees, because in SPS committee also there are different guidelines on different provisions of SPS agreement. So what is the legal obligation?
I think that's a very important question, and especially for the lawyers that negotiate these type of instruments. We have briefly alluded to that before the break, and so this is clearly not an international treaty. This will not be at the same status as the TBT agreement itself, but since it's a decision taken by the committee, hopefully by consensus, it will have, let's say, perhaps lesser status, formally speaking, but members take this guidance very seriously. So even though they are saying that the guidelines will be non-prescriptive and flexible and complementary, if there is something there that needs to be followed, I am sure that in the future, this type of instrument can be used as soft law, as it were, to then guide, other members moving forward. So, simply to say, even though formally it's not a treaty itself, members value these type of discussions and instruments very, very much.
I think guideline does not have any legal obligation.
So yeah, it's not a formal international obligation. Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we'll have to, maybe you want to say something, yeah?
This is a very vital point. I just want to impress. You know, if you have to create a new treaty, it is a phenomenal, humongous effort. Signing treaties, I think, according to the international treaties, which is multilateral, where 164 or 180 countries come on board, is a passage. We don't think we might be able to achieve one more in any time in the future. So the next best alternative, which the people who are part of this multilateral have realized, is to go towards creating these guidelines and recommendations, where a clear commitment of political intent is shown, and a legitimate expectation can be expected from the state, instead of the other alternative was state should bind itself in a treaty. If states are not willing to bind, but they have intention to do this voluntarily, but still you need to have a framework. That's why Mateo was saying soft rules. So coming days, like what Erik always keeps saying, that these are the times for soft rules.
Thank you so much. I think we'll have to wrap it up, but tomorrow morning we can continue if you have any more doubts. Thank you so much.